Hey, hi Camille.
Hey, I
How's it
thought you were
going?
frozen. You look like a picture. That was nice. Do you mind moving your camera like up a little bit? Yeah,
Yeah,
cool. Awesome.
cool.
How are you? How are you?
I'm
The,
good.
it, the, what is the state of the game?
Um, it's looking really bad. I would rather not watch at this point, but it could go either way. I mean,
Okay, for
both teams have
context.
scored,
Yeah, for
but
context, Mushfiq is watching a football game, and so he's probably just checking the scores every now and then, and or maybe not because
I've
he's
got it on mute.
disinvested now.
But yeah, I might,
Yeah.
I might
Okay.
look through.
That's actually why we're having it at this time. It's because of the match, right? Um, yeah, I'm on to you. Um, okay, how are you doing?
I'm not bad. Good. How are you? How are things over there?
It's like we're going through this crazy heat wave.
Lucky
Like
you.
it's just yeah, on the northeast, it's really really nuts. Hello everyone, welcome. We'll just wait for people to join before getting started. We're basically having a SAAG chats with Mushfiq, who is he's a senior editor with SAAG, but also I'll actually let you introduce yourself, Mushfiq.
Hi, my name is Mushfiq. I work as a lawyer mostly, but for the past few years, I've been doing mostly legal research, doing advocacy and campaigns around human rights issues in the Maldives. Um, and yeah, doing litigation that highlights human rights issues, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So this is like just a funny anecdote that I think that the world should know. But I don't know how long it's been that you've been on the team now, but it feels like you've been for most of this year, right? But
Yeah,
I
pretty
remember like
much.
yeah, because I read a piece of yours in Himal, so and then I talked to Shubhanga and I was like, who is this guy? Shubhanga is the editor in chief of Himal magazine and he's also a senior editor with SAG. And so he told me that, this guy's Mushfiq and you should talk to him. Like, he would be great to have on the team. And I reached out to Mushfiq and I remember, like, when we first talked, even before that, you were just like, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a this, I'm not a that. And I was just like, okay, it's fine. Like you can be a lawyer and still be very very good on the team. Like, it was just really funny because I think you just like I
Too
it was really
indoctrinated.
adorable actually.
I'm too indoctrinated. That's why.
I mean, I think it's also because people think that like certain fields should not like these are all artists and writers, right? Like we don't intersect with them. We're not real journalists. I'm a fucking historian, right? So like I mean I guess yes I'm a writer, but like but what I get paid for predominantly is to be an academic historian right now, a grad student. So um I don't know. It's just but also like doctors can be pretty involved in like leftist mag stuff as well. I've seen a lot of that. It's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't want to be taking up anybody's space, like, stepping on toes. That's what I was really worried about. That's why I was
I
like,
know,
are
but
you
the disclaimer
sure
was
you.
hilarious. Yeah, I just loved it. Okay, so today what we wanted to do is, especially because Mushfiq is Maldivian, and the Maldives is a place that really doesn't get much space in the South Asian spaces writ large, let alone South Asian diaspora, and and because of that and a number of other reasons, mostly to do with the myopia of the subcontinent's nation states. Though the mainland nation states, a lot of people just don't know very much about the Maldives, and so I kind of want to start off with just a little bit of like context about the Maldives, and like let's bring it to the present. So let's kind of start with just like the Maldives' um, connection to colonialism, right?
Mhm.
And how. from how I understand it, it occupied a certain position in Indian Ocean trade until Portuguese rule. Is that correct? And like you
Yeah.
can explain from there on.
Yeah, I could even go a bit further back just to start. I mean, Maldives is mentioned not in its current form, but it is as a nation state mentioned in the Mahawamsa and things like that. And the first settlers are said to go back to the 3rd century. So the first Maldivians left India or the Indus Valley civilization at that period. And just to skip to probably European colonialism in the 19th century, there was the popular colonialist countries dominating politics and trade in the Maldives, such as the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the British from 1887. So the protectorate started in December 1887 and it ended in 1965 July. So that was the period of when Maldives had British protectorate status.
Right.
And from then on, it's been pretty much a sultanate after the conversion to Islam, which took place in the 13th or 12th century. I feel like I'm just going back and forth,
Yeah.
but you can feel free to like interrupt me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm understanding what you're saying.
So after the period of European colonialism, it was a republic, and the monarchy was sort of became elective for the most part of history until the 1960s when the Second Republic was introduced. And there was a referendum whether or not people wanted republicanism or for the monarchy, for the sultanate to continue.
Right. So can you like tell me a little bit about the Second Republic and like what it entailed? Like who? So the Second Republic was under the presidency of Ibrahim Nasir initially, right?
Yeah.
Or am I
So
getting
initially it was Mohamed Amin, and then it was succeeded by Nasir, and Mohamed Amin was assassinated. I mean, he was subject to mob violence after just 6 months of rule. But it coincided with the aftershock of the Second World War.
Yeah.
So it was a very turbulent period, especially because there was a lot going on, because Maldives was drafting an agreement with the British at the same time as well over the use of a naval base, an air force base in the south of the Maldives. So it was a pretty turbulent time during the 60s, I would say, politically in the Maldives. And after that, there was 30 years of rule by Gayoom. Gayoom, whom I would describe more as a sort of Ba'athist leader who increased Maldives' ties with the Middle East, and also had an iron fist type of rule for 3 decades. And I would say the first sort of Islamist influences in the country came about as a challenge to his religious authority. So there were, clerics and students who came from places like Egypt and Pakistan who was challenging. Mamun himself studied in Azhar in Egypt as well. So that, I would say, takes us to the sort of democratic transition that Maldives went through from the early 2000s. So I would say like late 90s to early 2000s, there was a sort of nascent movement that was wanting more or demanding more democratic freedoms. And there was no real, definitive group. It was just a lot of different groups coming together, trying to challenge this 3-decade-old dictatorship. And that sort of coalesced into this democratic movement, which gave birth to the Maldivian Democratic Party. The first government that came after the multi-party elections in 2008 was a coalition government. So it's always been the case that various different political parties come together to form government because no one party has, the votes to really to form a government on their own. So in 2008, there was the first multi-party elections in the Maldives. So before that, it was pretty much a referendum. The parliament would put forth a candidate and the people just decide on that. So it wasn't a proper electoral system.
Yeah, and in just sorry to cut you short there, but like
No
the recognition of political parties on like the legal level started fairly recently, right? It was like 2005, 2004.
2005, yeah, 2005 is when political parties were officially decriminalized.
Right.
There was a decree by the president at the time, Gayoom, who allowed political parties for the first time. And he himself had started a sort of reform agenda because of the pressure from these democratic groups. And also, as you know, the Indian Ocean tsunami took place around the same time. So that put even more pressure on that government to change its course and to introduce more democratic freedoms.
Yeah, so I kind of want to like get a little bit, because obviously, even before the decriminalization of political parties, there were political parties, right? So you mentioned the Andalat party, right? And currently the party that's in power, like currently there's a coalition in power, which is the Maldivian Democratic Party candidate, Ibrahim Mohamed Solih, am I pronouncing it correctly? Yeah. But then you also have, the People's Party of the Maldives. So how do you situate like all of these parties in terms of like the ideological spectrum? So like when you had Gayoom and you had the Andalat party sort of formed in opposition to him, essentially, right? As an Islamist opposition group to him and his rule. How would you characterize the political parties and the landscape of electoral politics since then and to the present?
I would say that it's been changing quite a bit. For example, Adalat Party styled itself as like a spin-off of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I'm sure ideologically those things have changed because the people running the party has changed.
Yeah.
They might have started with a few clerics, but a lot of the people who are sort of front and center in Adalat Party at the moment might not have the same sort of ideological standing as its predecessors. And with the MDP, it also started quite as a sort of leftist liberal party, but it's now become quite center right in its ideology. And the other, what you have a lot of the time is parties that have center around personalities.
Right.
So with the PPM, that was started by Gayoom.
Yeah.
Initially as the Divya Yitunga party, which was DRP, but then he had formed another party and moved on to PPM, and then that party was taken over by his half-brother, and he formed another movement recently in 2016. So there's been, the political landscape is changing so dramatically all the time. So it's really hard to sort of track the ideological workings, because it's just constantly changing. And it's constantly contradicting itself as well.
But it's also like a political climate that, looking from the outside is invisibilized for the most part, right? Because of this Maldivian, the because of the Maldivian tourism industry, partly, right, and because of the certain like face that the Maldives feels the need to put on, and has put on and has been sort of co-opted and appropriated onto Maldivian culture as if it's sort of authentic. But how much of that is like, first of all, like how detrimental is the characterization of Maldives as as a tourist destination, and to like actual lived
Mm.
experiences of Maldivians, right? Like that's I would presume quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah, because especially under a capitalist system, like where are those profits going? They're going to like the private sector, right? So what is the relationship there between the tourism industry and politics and life in the Maldives?
Um, I would say it is the lifeblood or lifeline of the economy. That has to be said. But at the same time, like you said, there's an invisibilizing effect on the actual people living there. And it's, this multi-billion dollar industry that tells you that there's nothing you need to know about the Maldives apart from how much
Yeah,
you can spend on these islands. There's no need
yeah,
to really know about the people. And I guess like when you're going on a holiday, you're not really trying to write a thesis about the people in this country.
it's
So I
true.
guess that also makes sense. But
Yeah, but it
there's
also, I think, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but that you can't really divorce the structural violence of that popular image
Exactly,
because
yeah.
it is invisibilizing the actual people and the grievances people and island communities have. And if you look at the imagery, um, if ever a Maldivian is present in the imagery, it's a very subservient and
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
it's very white centering type of imagery that you get with the tourism industry. So if you think about reporters on the ground, they're fighting against this massive industry that's hell-bent on keeping
Yeah.
the country simplified. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
a
but
very
I mean, it's also interesting in a way that I think would be fairly recognizable to people who are coming from Pakistan or India or any place, any other like large nation state in South Asia, which is that like the tourism industry in any of these countries cannot be divorced from like some certain simulacrum of what you might describe as culture, of Indian culture, Pakistani culture, and of course those are problematics as well, right? Like what is Indian culture has been, I mean, it's basically Bollywood culture put out for like like white people who are visiting India or whatever, but it still has some organic relationship to visiting the country. The Maldives, especially being um, a nation, a nation that knits together, an archipelago of islands, right? It seems to be a little bit more divorced from any kind of concept of like Maldivian culture or like the sort of um,
good.
link to what actually exists in this country.
Yeah, it's like a really disturbing take on Maldivian culture. Like, if you
Yeah,
look at the aesthetics, like, even the way that the villas are built, they take from the Maldivian traditional, sort of ideas like a palm thatched house and hut, sort of, and an
yeah,
open sort of bathroom area. Because, like, in
yeah.
the olden days, they used to have open air uh, bathrooms in the Maldives, and it's kind of like blanked out version of Maldivian culture.
Yeah, but how would it differ? Like, I mean, I remember I've looked up like I mean, I was looking up like images for like I don't know, like villas and hotels on like in luxury hotels and villas in the Maldives, which are like right on the beachfront, and like people are shelling out a lot of money, especially during the pandemic. People have been shelling out a lot of money to go to the Maldives because the
Yeah.
Maldivian government has been like, come on, right? The funny thing about that is that like I wouldn't be able to distinguish any of those images from, say, like Bali, or like I mean,
Mm.
I genuinely can't. It's like this sort of like Asian-ish identity.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It could be the beaches of Thailand. It could be the beaches of Bali. I don't know. It could be anywhere. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I was kind of
And
just like, I
even,
don't.
I guess it's a bit far removed from even Bali, because in Bali there is
Yes,
some sort of cultural tourism,
that's true. That's
but
true. Yeah.
in Maldives, and it used to be extremely exclusive and, a luxury market
Yeah. Yeah.
until, and if I, just to put it in context, um, tourism on the inhabited islands were illegal until 2009.
Yeah.
So the tourism industry started in the 60s, but it was only on uninhabited islands, like deserted islands, that were then given to a company, then or a Maldivian landlord who would then develop it for a tourism resort, and things like that. So it was a really exclusive market that they were developing, and I guess it's changed a lot since the introduction of guest house tourism. But that this is all very, very recent. And this is why I guess the Maldives is a very old nation, but a very new country,
Yeah.
in terms of politics, and a lot of it's happened in the past 4 decades. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I find if I we're gonna have to like make a very short pivot to the Transitional Justice Act because we really have to talk about it. Because, like, if we let tourism overtake this conversation, then we'll be doing the exact same thing that tourism does, which is kind of hilarious. And also, I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for any like questions to arise about like reported pieces and essays and stuff that like Mushfiq wants to work on, that I want to work on. We'll talk about that like 5 minutes or so. But let's talk right now about the Transitional Justice Act, right? That was passed at the end of last year, and I want you to like give us the context for this and for the particular acts and atrocities that it is seeking redress for, and how and the mechanisms of enforcement, and what what is intended and what is actually going to be enforced. Like, you have written about this for Himal, and there's plenty of considerations going on there. But let's start off with why this Transitional Justice Act needed to be enacted in the first place, and why human rights advocates would have wanted it to pass in the first place.
Just going back to the last election, it was a very sort of cutthroat election where most people thought that the previous president was going to hold on to power. And this was a very anti-democratic government, blatantly authoritarian government. So a lot of political actors and groups sort of united together to defeat this common enemy. And some of them were defectors from that previous government. So they included the Transitional Justice
This
Bill
is
in the.
Abdullah Yameen, by the way, right?
Yeah, Abdullah Yameen's government lost the election in 2018, and then President Saleh came into power, and he included the Transitional Justice Bill in the legislative agenda. So it was a very sort of like hopeful, promising time, and
Yeah.
it was a national unity government that was trying to create peace after a long period of anti-democratic sort of, political and civil instability.
Right.
And I mean, I would say that it's really commendable that this act was passed and that the government listened to civil society as well. It's not an easy thing to sort of keep political configurations in place in the Maldives. It can be very unpredictable, and it could really easily fall over, if because of the competing interests as well. So the law was passed in December 2020, and a new office was created through that law, the Office for the Ombudsman for Transitional Justice. And the president appointed 3 ombudspersons, including a chief ombudsman, and they've been mandated with looking into past abuses from January 1952. If I'm not mistaken, 1953 to November 2018.
Okay.
So I worked with a small research team to look into some of these sort of atrocities, looking into history books, going into archives, and interviewing a lot of people, survivors of different atrocities. And in the case of the Maldives, it's a lot more sporadic. There is no one whole of an atrocity like Sri Lanka's civil war or the apartheid system in South Africa. So it's very different. There's been sort of short periods of political violence that sort of coincides with this temporal jurisdiction in this act, or the time period of this act. So, I mean, just as we were discussing, coincidentally, he's one of the, his case is the first sort of atrocity that we looked into, because he was subjected to mob violence on his return from a medical trip. And that was characterized as a coup by a lot of historians who were writing about it at the time. And that was followed by this period where there was atrocities in the South. The South had briefly a breakaway nation called the United Swadesh Republic, which lasted about 3 years. So this was also during the time that the British had a naval base in Addu, which is known as Addu City, and it's the southernmost atoll in the Maldives. So there were atrocities around the period from the early 1960s or the late 1950s to independence in 1965, where there were uprisings. Obviously this was a secessionist movement, and government cracked down on it, and there was parliamentary approval for the government to crack down on it. And the military uprooted island communities in the South. People were dispersed to sort of stop this movement. People had to be exiled. A lot of these island communities were displaced. A lot of people were tortured, and a lot of this is not really mentioned in any sort of like popular discussion in the Maldives politically, and it's not really mentioned in school books or history books. And a lot of literature that talks about this is actually from the democratic transition period in the mid-2000s, because before that it was illegal to write or express anything political. So a lot of the writing that we looked into came after 2008, when historians and authors were, a lot more secure and felt that they could write and publish controversial views.
So, okay, I'm still. I guess unlike like you said, unlike any other country where it is far easier to sort of pinpoint the specific atrocities that we're talking about, it's different in the Maldives. And so I guess the first thing I would sort of want to ask is how political repression is tied to Islamist repression in a lot of these in a lot of this stuff, but also more, I think, in a more particular way, like, is the office of the ombudsman, that is set up by the act, essentially the equivalent of like a truth and reconciliation commission that would occur in, that has occurred in, that has taken place in countries like South Africa, much of, South America, etc. Um, is that how it's operating, under like sort of international, human rights perspectives, and how how much value, how much faith do you really have in how much faith should we have in sort of truths coming to the surface, given what we know thus far?
The survivors that we spoke to were very, questioned this whole mechanism, and they weren't really sort of sure of getting anything out of it.
Yeah.
I remember some people saying that they're only letting me interview them for historical purposes so that this will be recorded rather than thinking that they're going to get reparations out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, this ombudsman office is supposed to operate like a reparations program where people can submit claims, which then they will look into. They will reopen investigations and work with different government agencies such as the police and other, the Prosecutor General's office, the Attorney General's office, to bring about criminal and civil litigation that will enable people to get reparations. And it was really good that the law is amazing, but whether or not we will be able to implement this law is really the question, I guess.
Right.
And, it talks about getting reparations in a holistic sense, about providing people with rehabilitation, with, restitution, with mental health services. So it's a very holistic act. And if the government is able to implement it in accordance with what it says, that will be, a really good move forward for the Maldives, because it would reconcile a lot of these sort of multi-generational feuds and a lot of things that is brewing this political turbulence. But like you said, the people don't really have much faith in it. Since I wrote the second article, there's been quite a bit of activity around the Ombudsman office. They've held public consultations, they've met with the press, and they've sort of announced their mandate, and they've got a website and people can submit claims. And I've also heard that defense lawyers are now submitting claims on behalf of their clients who were, tortured during this 1953-2018 period, whether it was during a protest or whether it was some sort of political persecution.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be up and running now in a lot of ways.
That's really, yeah.
But the confidence of the people and the survivor communities are not that high when it comes to, getting any sort of damages. Because what they bring up also is the fact that Maldives is unable to deal with day-to-day things, day-to-day crime and things like this, or sort of unresolved atrocities like the forced disappearance of Rilwan, a journalist who was working at the Independent, and also the killing of Yamin Rashid, the blogger who was campaigning to find out what happened to Rilwan. So there's a lot of sort of lack of confidence in the authorities to resolve crimes, especially because it's been such a long time since this government came into power, and it has been moving very slowly.
Right.
So that can also be a sort of delaying of justice, and that creates its own, problems when it comes to perception.
And the fact that the act passed was in and of itself a huge surprise, right? It was
Absolutely.
unexpected from what I gathered.
Absolutely. Also, the fact that the temporal jurisdiction or the time period changed. We had to
Yeah.
pressure the government. A lot of international and local NGOs came together and pressured the government to change this time period because initially the bill said that the period would be between 2012 and
Hmm.
2018.
Hmm.
So the most recent sort of spout of political turbulence started in 2012 when there was a coup against the first democratically elected government in February 2012.
Yeah.
So a lot of the sort of political configurations that transpired have been as a result of that. And yeah, so there were protests from 2012 until the 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 last elections
Yeah.
in 2014, and then was the Yamin government, which was in power from 2014 until 2018. So
Yeah. I kind of want to like, pivot this over to like something that I'm just sort of like curious about. So as viewers may or may not know, but as Mushfiq definitely knows, we, as part of our last event in Grief and Solidarity, we had a Divehi Artist Showcase that was curated by Kareen Adam and Nazis Janara, who's on the team. And one of the things very early on that I remember, um, in the exchanges that were occurring, about the showcase was very much a sort of like fear within the cultural domain, um, for doing things that would criticize, that would expose, the like artists or creatives or writers, etc., to actual, um, you know threats to their lives, and etc., either on religious grounds or on speech grounds, etc., there certainly seems to be a very strong, and this was also recently, I saw that there was a Maldivian pride Instagram account that was forcibly shut down because there was like basically this avalanche of terrible comments regarding the how un-Islamic it was, and so I want to ask like how constrained the cultural domain feels and seems to be right now by by the twin forces of both like fundamentalist Islam, but also a sense that there is no restitution from you know Islamist violence.
just to start, I would say that the sort of Islamic practices that were in the Maldives were very moderate to
Mm,
begin with. Religion only became politicized pretty recently,
yeah,
and it has been used as a way of eliminating opponents as well.
yeah,
Just by simply accusing somebody of not being Islamic enough, or being anti-Islamic, or the really overused word ladini, which means anything from anti-religious to irreligious or non-religious. So that's a word that gets thrown around pretty casually.
yeah,
And this has real world consequences. It's not just somebody online saying
yeah,
this person is anti Islamic, but that this is followed through by some sort of vigilante mob or a violently active radical. So,
yeah,
I mean, there are consequences to, acting out and saying certain things, or and it's what I've noticed is it's not, you don't have to be an activist or a politician or anybody who's visible. Just tweeting something or having something on your bio like "football is my religion," something that's obviously not,
yeah, yeah,
sarcastic.
yeah,
It's then misconstrued, willfully misconstrued, and used as some sort of smearing to legitimize attacks against people. So I understand why artists and journalists, even in this democratic, in relative terms, democratic environment that exists in the Maldives right now, it's still quite a huge risk factor to sort of stick your head out and say something that could be construed by religious hardline, because you never know
But
what's.
is there an oppositional force within I is there an oppositional force within either the working class or the elite that actually represents, leftist revolutionary ambitions that is counterposed to the Islamism that you see in the cultural domain? Like, is that force visible? Is it there, in that sort of in the sort of way that we mean it? I mean, a lot of this is very similar to like Pakistan's blasphemy law, right? Like you cry blasphemy and you are crying for vigilante action. You
Yeah.
from most things that women do, like that is, as we know from recent events in Pakistan, there is vigilante action is very easy to invoke, but at the same time, you have a group, like you do have genuine movements on the left and a working class that is waiting to be mobilized, both by political parties and individuals who are working within the working class. I'm wondering if an oppositional structure even exists in a sort of in any kind of form.
I guess there's a lot of people trying to counter these ideas, these sort of violent narratives, from civil society to political parties, but it's very, there's sort of like you hit a wall because of the legal framework that is sort of constricting free speech. So how do you counter some of these things without having free speech that is not restricted through legislation or based on religious grounds? So
Right.
that's, I think, what is sort of circumventing that kind of progress. But I do think that people, civil society actors and political actors, do try to counter it and try to sort of bring back to the sort of traditional ideas about nationhood and national identity. But it's just very hard because of the impunity that these groups enjoy. I mean, just like how you mentioned the Pride page on Instagram, like,
Yeah.
can these people actually go to the police and report this,
Yeah.
or will the police then start persecuting this group, this kid who's made this Instagram page?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a stalemate. It's very hard to bring about this kind of progress or talk about religious or sexual minorities when free speech is restricted in this way. It sort of gives the freeway for the most extreme views on religion to take hold in society. And just to add more to this, I would say there's also this intense sense of injustice that is breeding sort of radicalization and people becoming disaffected, this sense of injustice, and also not having ownership over the country.
Right.
The ownership is currently, the Maldives is now pretty much a company that's run by a few oligarchs, that both domestic and overseas. So it doesn't really speak for the actual people living in it, and the actual people living in it live in it as second-class citizens. So this is all creating this sort of polarization that we find ourselves in today. So
Yeah, Mushfiq and I were just talking about this recently, and this is for everybody out there, not for you, because obviously we talked about it. But we were talking about how we should subsequently someday have a discussion about island communities within the Indian Ocean and within because the Maldives is actually, strangely enough, along with Sri Lanka, peculiar in that it does actually have nation state status, unlike the archipelagos of the Andaman Islands, the Nicobar Islands, the Lakshadweep Islands, and that's something that we should definitely talk about at some point. What's the score? What's the score?
It looks like England's won.
It looks like England's won.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was what you
2-1.
wanted, but
So I heard everything you said, by the way, even though I have my
it's fine.
headset.
It's fine. I mean, I wasn't actually saying it to you. I was saying it to
Um,
everyone.
no, it's really interesting that you brought up the Union territories because
Yeah.
I feel like if Maldives wasn't an independent or a sovereign country
Yeah.
pre-colonialism, I think it would be similar to the situation of Lakshadweep, Nicobar, and Andaman Islands, where there's like very, very little visibility, and you know, like these countries have been left, these territories, these union territories have been left to its own devices, just like parts of the Maldives have been left to
Yeah.
its own devices,
Exactly.
where there's you know, severe underdevelopment and there's no sort of mobilization of the people or any ownership of their community. Like I've heard recently about Lakshadweep as well, where you know they were threatening people to be uprooted to sort of bring in Maldives style tourism, and now it's almost like we are a cliche of this sort of
Yeah.
capitalist destruction. Everyone's like, oh,
Yeah.
let's do a Maldives type tourism thing where it's super exclusive and it looks like
Yeah.
hyper real, and you know, so I don't know, it's very unsettling to hear about these things because these are island communities that are even more invisibilized than the Maldives, especially like places like Nicobar and
Yeah.
Andaman, where you know there are uncontacted tribes as well. So it's very interesting to sort of look into these peripheries of South Asia, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to SAAG as well, because you're trying to center the periphery, which is
And
something
I think it's
that's
going
so
to be,
needed.
sorry, yeah.
No,
I think this is like a good thing to end on, and we kind of do need to end because if we go past 1 hour, I can't save it. But I mean, I remember like when we talked about it, it was like something like, oh my God, we kind of need to like find people who can speak to, you know, like the Nicobar Island, like a given island or in the archipelago or whatever, and we need to locate those communities and those writers or artists or free journalists or whatever, because that's very important to SAG, and that kind of like leads me to the last sort of question, which is that like, you know, now that we are looking for, and this is a funny thing because this is an internal conversation that we also need to have, so don't give too much away, but I guess looking ahead, what would you like, what kinds of essays, like you're in the essays, you're an editor for essays, you're also an editor for reporting, um, what kind of work are you looking for, like what would really move you and really sort of you know, inspire you? What kind of work would you, as an editor, if any writers or artists are watching this, who would be, or essayists would be, who want to submit, are watching this, what are you looking for as an editor?
I guess stories of the subaltern in the South Asian context, and people who have been sort of relegated to the periphery of South Asian identity. A lot of the time, when people talk about South Asia, they really mean Pakistan or India. They don't really talk about Bhutan, Nepal,
Yeah.
and you know, a lot of these other countries, Tibet, Andaman and Nicobar, Rohingya communities,
Right.
and a lot of these sort of excluded communities. So that would be a great, and how these communities converge, what are the conversations that these communities have had. Like you mentioned, Maldives was pretty much integral to the Indian Ocean slave trade. It's
Yeah.
the cowrie shells were generated from
Yeah.
the Maldives, and that itself brings South Asia or the Indian Ocean in contact with North Africa as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And it also
and
implicates us in a way because
absolutely,
there were South Asian slave traders and also slave
absolutely,
masters. So
yeah.
you know,
So yeah,
yeah,
these are topics that aren't really discussed when it comes to South Asia. It's very much partition oriented. It's also oriented around the countries that the European powers mostly focused on, rather than
yeah,
countries like Sri Lanka or Maldives that weren't as important, and were mostly seen as a strategic sort of location rather than resources that they needed for empire building.
and also
So
a sort of like I would say post-colonial, even though I think it's mostly a misinterpretation of post-colonial, but almost a post-colonial assumption of like victimization narratives as opposed to more complicated integration and complicity narratives, like we just talked about the slave trade, right? And there's so much more of that. I mean, the post-colonial critique does not mean that everything that Eurocentrism is the target of every single thing. Like there's
yeah,
actual, there's actual complicity within South Asia that is divorced from, that can be divorced from European influence, and that's something that I personally really look forward to. But okay, well, you heard him. For anybody who wants to submit, that's the kind of stuff that Mushfiq likes. So now you know. And okay, so England won, huh?
yeah. It looks like it's still going on. It's extra. Wait, I think it's still going on. Yeah.
Damn. See, this is why I don't watch football. It goes on forever. I don't watch anything. I don't watch sports. They always go on forever.
Well, it's less time than cricket, so
Well, fair. That's fair. That's fair. I mean, I can't. I mean, I can only take like a 1 day match, but even that is too hard for me now. But yeah.
yeah.
Anyway,
Especially when
so
it's
this
two
is
good teams playing. Sorry, I won't keep. Yeah,
yeah.
you have
No, no,
to.
no. This is wonderful. I just really have to save this before yeah, Instagram tells me I can't save it to the feed.
Cool.
All right. Well, I'll see you soon. Thank you for everybody who's watching this. And if you have any comments or questions for Mushfiq, he is part of SAAG. So send the questions to us wherever you want, and we'll send them to him. All right. Take care, and
Thanks
I'll see
so
you
much
soon.
for having me. And
Yeah,
yeah, thanks
it's a
everyone for
pleasure.
joining. Yeah, I look forward to receiving your pitches.
All right. Catch you on the flip side.
Bye.